Your Family, Lucy. Written and read by Bad Writer. Lucius Malfoy had not been to Grimmauld Place in 35 years, yet he remembered it as vividly as his morning walk. He'd been so young then, bright-eyed and brimming with ideas of a better, purer future for his family. He'd had his gorgeous wife in his arms, with a son at her hip, gurgling and tugging at his mother's hair. And she'd turned to him with a gleaming smile and said, "It'll be fine, dear." They hadn't, of course. Aunt Walburga had been a cold, grieving mess. Signius had wrinkled his nose at Draco's unmistakable Malfoyish complexion. And then, of course, there'd been Bella, mad as ever, whispering in Narcissa's ear all she truly thought about her new brother-in-law. Oh, how naive he'd been. He'd thought, so what if I married for love? So what if the Blacks wanted Narcissa to marry someone duller, more malleable, less cunning than a Malfoy? He'd loved her, and he was going to build a new world for her, for his family. And 30-something years later, he stood at the very same coiling iron gate and realized his mistake. The front garden was neat, well maintained, stark in contrast to the mangled bunch of twigs from decades ago. A delicate arrangement of lilies glittering with the remnants of pixie dust, and beside them daffodils, narcissus. Painted, an impossible shade of baby blue that reminded him of nothing but her eyes. He forced himself forward, his cane clacking against the stone stairs. At the large oak door, he could hear the distant echoes of voices, poorly warded, he assumed with a scoff. The ancient pureblood home must have rejected the bevy of ill-bred mongrels living within its sacred walls. Half-bloods living in Grimmauld Place. It made his own skin crawl at the vile notion that those filth-stained children were related to him, to his legacy. The blood mixing with the dirt in their veins was the same as his. He was going to turn back. He should have turned back, yet he couldn't. He had to see it with his own eyes. He had to witness the foul stain his own son had thrust upon their family name. So he knocked, and not a moment later, the door swung open. He remembered the first time he saw Lily Evans, 11, with huge doe eyes, tugging on his sleeve outside the Slytherin dormitory. "Please let me in," she'd begged as he swatted her away. "I need to see him." "You dare touch me, you filthy mudblood!" he'd shouted and flung her off him. The girl who stood in front of him remained almost identical to her grandmother, though her skin was darker, hair blonder, yet through all that, the resemblance of a woman whose death had broken his closest friend beyond repair shook him to his core. A ghost in the form of an inky mark on his left forearm. "You came!" the little half-blood bleated, bouncing on her toes, pausing to gasp aloud and then repeat, "Oh shit, you came!" "Who's at the door, Lilypad?" came a familiar, yet much deeper voice than what he remembered, disembodied through the hallways of the winding house. "Oh shit," squeaked the girl, thin tortoiseshell glasses slipping down her nose. He had half a mind to chide her on her language. Narcissa would have wanted him to. But he was prevented as a flurry of footsteps followed by 2 tall boys bounded into view. The tallest was starkly pale, with a telltale black nose and vibrant bluish hair. He froze when he saw Lucius, yellowy eyes blinking as he gaped openly, tugging back his fellow, a stocky boy with wild honey-blonde curls and icy green eyes. "You didn't," the blonde murmured, eyeing whom from likeness Lucius could only assume to be his sister. "I may have," she replied sheepishly. "Your grandma was right. They really do look identical," said the boy with blue hair, A friend, perhaps? Yet that nose, eerily familiar, especially within the walls of the black residence. It's impolite to leave a guest waiting in the cold, Lucius sneered down at the half-bloods. Draco should have taught them better than that. Though, clearly, Draco wasn't one for good decisions any longer. Right, replied the half-blood girl, moving aside, allowing him entrance to their living room. It was a cramped little abode, smaller than he'd remembered, with a leather couch and a roaring fireplace, littered with pictures that made his stomach turn. Names? He asked, turning back to face the three children. Lily, and that's James. Oh, and Teddy. Lucius bit back the laugh. Of course. As if the Malfoy name couldn't be dirtied any further. They had to go about reminding the world of their filthy blood traitor grandparents. Lucius bit back the laugh. Dad's gonna kill you, muttered James, eyeing Lily. Shut up, she bit back, rounding on her brother. No, Lils, I'm with James on this one. You're dead. They haven't seen each other in 17 years. Could you imagine not seeing Dad for that long? She snapped back, wagging a finger at the boys. Your father doesn't know I'm here, Lucius mused aloud. Dad, I think you should come here, said a voice from the edge of the room that caused Lucius's heart to promptly stop. Draco, he almost said, and then he didn't, noticing the bright emerald of the child's eyes. Snitch! Lily shrieked at the perfect reincarnation of 14-year-old Draco. Everything about him was plucked straight out of the albums he'd burnt 17 years ago, and Lucius clutched his cane to keep him upright. The slight point to his features, the aristocratic upturned nose, the white hair falling loose with curls over his alabaster forehead. What is it, Scott? And Lucius was face to face with the man who'd torn apart his family and splattered filth all over the Malfoy name. And Potter went straight for his wand. What the fuck are you doing here, Lucius? Now, Potter, is that any way to treat a dinner guest? Lucius replied coolly. Potter didn't lower his wand, eyes still blazing as he spoke. That's not my name anymore, and you know it. Lucius, to his credit, didn't respond. He did, however, spit on the rug and glare right back at Potter. Behind Potter, he could see a mini-me ducking his head out to get a better view of the action. I won't ask you again, Lucius. What the fuck are you doing in my house? For dinner, of course. My dear granddaughter invited me. Oh, shit, whooped the boy, hiding behind Potter. Potter's wand began to lower as his eyes fell on the small ginger girl. Lily? He asked softly, still firmly gripping his wand. I'm sorry, it's just Grandma talked about him all the time, and I thought Father probably missed him. Potter took a deep breath, pinching the bridge of his nose with a groan. You've had almost 20 years, Lucius. Why now? I needed to see his ordure for myself. It was about time I came to terms with the contamination he's caused. Well, that's just wonderful, isn't it? Said Potter, looking honestly quite worn out. He seemed dishevelled by Lucius's words. You'd think after 2 wars and 3 years in Azkaban, you'd figured out maybe you were wrong with the whole purist bullshit. That maybe you'd take a good look at yourself and realize your mistake. Narcissa clearly did. How dare you? Lucius bellowed, stepping forward. You dare speak her name, you filthy half-blood. The only mistake I ever made was trusting my son with the family legacy. And now you dare speak of her as though you were equals? Potter was alert again, brazen and brandishing his wand high once more. And don't you dare talk about my husband like that." All right, said the blue-haired boy, stepping between them. "Let's all just calm down." "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" Lucius sneered, vaguely aware Draco wasn't old enough to have a son this boy's age. Your nephew? Wait, grandnephew, I think," he said the same time Potter said, Andromeda's grandson. "You mean he's—" "Careful," said Harry with a glower. "The werewolf! You let a creature like that near my grandchildren?" He said it before he let his brain catch up with him. But thankfully, the blue-haired boy caught Potter's arm as he lunged. "I'm not a werewolf," the boy said sternly, shoving Potter backwards again. "Harry, calm down." "You haven't changed one bit, have you, Lucius?" "Nor have you. Last I saw you, you were grovelling on your knees, begging for consent to marry my son." "Yeah, and how'd that turn out for you? What you got now, Lucius? A family? A single person in this world that gives a damn about you? Yeah, you really showed me what's what." "Pure blood, that's what I've got, Potter." "Huh, you still can't fathom that I actually did it, can you? That I married him, that even after the hell you put him through, he actually managed to make something of himself. That he's a better father than you ever were. A father to children with tainted blood." "You don't even know us," chirped a previously quiet voice, the spitting image of Draco that made his chest ache. Lucius scoffed. "I don't need to. If you're anything like Potter, I know enough." "How can you say that?" "Scorpius, don't," said Harry. Scorpius. It was a black name, a pure-blood name. So fitting for such a Malfoyish boy. The boy shook his head and cleared his throat, sizing Lucius up. "I don't think you're what Dad says. I don't think you're like that. Grandma used to talk about you, and I don't think she could love someone who was evil." "You raise your son to speak to his superiors in such a matter?" "I raise my son to speak his mind, to think for himself. Something, had you have done, would have saved your own son a great deal of torment." Lucius's own sense of decorum was the only thing keeping him from reaching forward and throttling Potter. That, and the faint jingling of keys coming from the front door. "Fuck," said James, and Potter didn't even bother to chide it. "Harry, you're not going to believe what Chapman did to—" Lucius wasn't sure why, but in his mind, Draco was still a bright-eyed youth, not even 19. He was a boy, a naive adolescent with so many things to learn about the real world. Draco was not a man with faint crow's feet around his eyes, meticulous braids, and a strong and sure stature. And yet, there he stood, frozen in billowing attorney robes, with high and pointy cheekbones. He looked the same Lucius had at that age. Almost the same, he noted. His hair was looser, and there were lines on his cheeks from smiling. And, of course, the scar that ran down from his nose all the way down to his navel. Draco's stunned expression took only a moment to right itself, falling blank and stoic. "Father," he greeted, extending his hand with all the propriety that had been drilled into him since birth. Lucius didn't take it. A Malfoy wouldn't dare shake the blighted hand of a blood traitor, even if it was his own son. "I wasn't expecting your presence." Draco tried again, straightening his posture, eyes steady on Lucius. "I'm not at fault for that. One of your half-breeds sought to invite me to dinner." He saw Draco take the insult. It flashed against his face for just a moment before he gulped and bore it. "Yes, well, forgive my family. I'm sure we would have been more hospitable had we been informed." "We would have?" asked James with a snicker and a quirked brow. James, Harry scolded, head shaking. Dinner, Harry? Draco said sternly, refusing to look away from Lucius, not daring to break eye contact. At least, Lucius thought, after all these years, Draco remembered how people were to behave around their blood superiors. Right. Harry nodded, ducking away, back where he'd come. You know, I haven't even been offered a drink. You don't have elves? Though I suppose your horde of half-bloods does suffice as help. Am I to assume you cannot afford house elves? Creature? Draco called, followed by the pop of apparition and the grueling, withered expression of Waldburger's favourite house elf. Get my father a drink, a glass of the Chateau Lafayette. Will sirs be wanting one too? The house elf asked, peering back up at Draco. I'll have one, chimed James. Yeah, me too, added the sole dark-haired boy who'd been previously shrouded by Potter. Just one glass of the Lafayette. And the house elf disappeared with a pop. Boo, James whined, relaxing now, slumping down on the leather couch. There was, of course, undeniable similarities between the familial arrogance of the eldest and Draco in his youth. Of course, Draco had been a pureblood, bred from the highest of crop. His arrogance had been expected, deserved even. Draco shuddered and gave Lucius a careful look, as if he noticed the same. I thought I'd see you at the funeral, Draco said. And tarnish her name by giving your family's farewell any credence. No, she should have been buried in the manor, as all true Malfoys are and always will be. But Grandma said she wanted to be buried in Godric's Hollow, said Lily, moving closer to her father. My wife was a complex woman. She didn't know what she wanted in the end. She knew she wanted her family to be together, the little girl pressed. Lily, don't, said Draco sternly as Creature reappeared to hand Lucius a glass of red wine. Go set the table, will you? Harry will be done with dinner soon, Draco told the children, and then back to Lucius. He said, Please excuse me for a moment, and then he left too. It was Creature that came to collect him after several minutes, informing him dinner would be served in the dining room. He remembered the way from all those years ago. Down a hallway, the second door on the right. They were all huddled together when he entered, Potter leaning down, furiously whispering into Draco's ear. The dark-haired boy was the only one seated, hunched over the table to fling peas at his white-haired sibling. He cleared his throat, announcing his entrance, stilling the room. This isn't awkward at all, snickered the dark-haired boy as the children all found their seats along the dining table. Looks good, Dad, chirped Lily as the roast chicken floated over to the table. Potter tightened his grip on Draco's waist as he tried to approach, with the others, glowering over at Lucius. Draco winced and turned to whisper something to Potter, who visibly relaxed when he pressed a kiss to his cheek. I have to try, Lucius heard Draco say as he detached himself, taking his seat opposite Lucius at the head of the table. So, how was your day, Draco? The werewolf spawn asked when Harry sat down. Very well, thank you. We won the foreign bras case this morning, Draco replied with carefully mannered formality, pausing only to chew. Ted and I were flying all day. I know I'm going to make Chaser. I just know it. James cheered through a mouthful of potatoes. And what house are you in? Lucius queried, followed by a long sip of his wine. Gryffindor, me and Scorpa. Lucius winced, setting down his wine, nodding slowly. He knew it had been foolish of him to hope otherwise. It wasn't like they were real Malfoys. Potter and his filthy blood had made sure of that. I'm in Slytherin, chirped the dark-haired boy closest to him. I'm not too keen on Quidditch, though, he added quickly, as Lucius met the boy's bright grey eyes. And what's your name? He asked the boy. Albus Severus, sir. Ah. It was, of course, to be expected that Potter named his son after that empty-headed old headmaster. Yet, Severus, he repeated, this time looking at Draco. He had not spoken of his now past friend in quite some many years. He was half-blood too, in case you've forgotten. Potter gritted out. Lucius held back his comment that Severus had always known his place in society. He knew the difference between pure and tarnished blood. Instead, he said, See, the difference there, Potter, is that Severus never threw my family name in the mud. Severus never disgraced my family, spat on the years of work Narcissa and I took to build a life for ourselves. Father, no, you listen here. I hate to say it, but I came here with hope. I dared to believe you would not truly disgrace your mother, disgrace me in the way you have, and believe all that fine work we spent teaching you of all the correct ways, you truly are nothing more than a blood traitor. She would never tell you this. She was too blinded by love, but I know how disappointed Narcissa was. You knew how much it broke her when she lost Andromeda, and yet you went and made all those same mistakes. Your actions broke her heart and drove her to an early grave, you and your filthy, traitorous children. And the fine porcelain of Draco's polite exterior shattered, and he rose from his seat, fire in his eyes. Don't you ever speak about my children like that, he roared, fists white against the tablecloth. All I ever did was follow your orders. Everything I did was for you, and look what that did to me. Draco tugged up his sleeve, exposing the faded ink on his wrist. Lucius flinched, and Draco let out a cold laugh. So after the war, I promised myself I was going to listen to my gut and not your prejudice, and I'm glad I did. You can keep your bloody legacy. I don't fucking need it. My children don't need it. They're perfect. And it scared you so much that Mother saw it. That's what killed her, Father. Your prejudice. So don't you dare come into my home and lecture me on tarnishing the family name, because you did that the moment you took the mark, and you solidified it when you forced me to follow in your footsteps. Lucius rose to his feet, standing so the last of the pure-blood Malfoys stayed at eye level. We raised you better than that. You knew the importance of what we were doing. You may tell yourself I forced it upon you, but we both know that that was a lie. There was a time you truly understood. I was 16 and I trusted you. I thought everything that came out of your mouth was the will of the world. And the moment I started to question you, the moment you realized your precious legacy was in danger, you abandoned me. I was 19, and you told me that unless I left Harry, you'd never speak to me again. I lost everything. Do you know how fucking alone I was? If it wasn't for Harry, I wouldn't have survived it. But I did, Father. I survived it. I have an amazing husband and 5 fucking amazing children, and I couldn't give a shit about what Malfoys aren't purebloods anymore. You were the last of the Blacks, the last of the Malfoys, and you threw that away like it meant nothing. It does mean nothing. These children are just as much your blood as I am. You refuse to see it because their great-grandparents were muggles, rather than that they are your own grandchildren. And no matter what it says on paper, no matter how many registers you struck my name out of, I am still your son. You're still so young, so naive. I once stood where you stood in this very house and spurted the same nonsense about building a better future, and I learned the hard way that there is no such fucking thing, Draco. We have traditions, we have rules for a reason. So you believe marrying Mother was a mistake, then? Of course not. I loved... Mother knew. She knew the old ways were wrong, and it destroyed her when you disowned me over something as petty as tradition. You know it did. You did to her what her parents put her through with Andromeda all those years ago, and she refused to take it. She wasn't afraid of change. She wasn't a coward like you. Draco's hand came up to wipe away fresh tears. Draco, Potter whispered, hand clutching Draco's waist protectively. Draco sank into the touch, allowing himself to be held. We never wanted this for you, Draco, Lucius said slowly, taking a seat. We wanted you to have a good life, to be happy. The sounds Draco let out was a mix between a sob and a laugh. That's what you don't get. I am happy. You could have had so much more, Draco. You don't understand. You could have had a true, pure family. Draco let out another quiet noise and looked away, tears still dripping down his cheeks. I think you should leave. Lucius didn't need to be told twice, pushing down the aching feeling in his chest as he stood, and left the way he'd come. He was halfway out the door when he heard the faint pitter-patter of footsteps dashing after him. Wait, she cried out, tugging on his sleeve to keep him inside. The little girl with strawberry blonde hair stopped in her tracks, and he glowered at her. I have something for you, she whispered. Grandma told me to give it to you when you came. And she outstretched her hand, and in the palm was a photograph. He plucked it from her hand and gaped at it. In a familiar twisting handwriting, it was captioned, Christmas Eve, 2009. She looked so elegant, in a dazzling green dress, her blue eyes twinkling up at him. The ginger toddler in her lap fussed and giggled and tried to catch her dangly earring. Seated on either side were two boys, one white-haired, the other with black. The pale-haired one was bouncing excitedly and desperate for her attention as his twin eyed her with a soft, appreciative smile, leaning forward to rest his chin on her shoulder and whisper something in her ear that made her giggle, ruffling his slicked-back hair. On the floor, tugging incessantly at the hem of her dress, was a tanned boy with yellow hair and a familiar smirk. Nana, his lips mouthed, just before he was tackled by another, whose eyes flashed baby blue, hair going blonde at her attention. Perched beside them on the armrest were two men grinning at one another, limbs coiled together in an embrace. Draco's head resting on Harry's shoulder as he turned to look at their family, grinning to himself, proud of his legacy. And Lucius turned the photo around and read in that same meticulous cursive, Your family, Lucy. Hi everyone, thanks for listening. I just wanted to come in and give a bit of an apology for the hiatus for all of my podfics. I had some issues with a lot of my kind of recording and editing software. For some reason, iMovie deleted off my laptop, which sucks. But I've figured it all out now, so hopefully I'll be back posting more podfics. I've got 2 of my already written one-shot drarry fics planned, as well as an ongoing John Damey fic coming up for podfics. But let me know if you have any other fic ideas that you want me to turn into a podfic. I really enjoy listening to podfics. I'm dyslexic, so it's always a bit of an issue having to sit down for hours trying to read one 2,000 word fic. And I always really appreciate when creators make fics into podfics, so it's more accessible to everyone. But let me know what you guys have been thinking. I'd love to hear some feedback and all that stuff. And as usual, remember to like and subscribe so you can hear more if you enjoyed this. And leave a comment if you have any other ideas or comments or just want to say hello. I also have a Ko-Fi if you guys want to donate something. Feel free, it's the holidays, you check out my commissions, my art, and my writing. And as usual, thank you for listening.